I noticed that you sent out a notification on local support.
Yeah.
I
All
mean
right.
on Slack, sorry.
Yeah. So uh, close that terminal and hit Command Spacebar to open up your search and search for iTerm 2. That'll work, yeah. I guess just iTerm.
Okay. There you go. And I'll use the same SSH.
Yeah, you can skip that download or download it, whatever. But that, there you go.
No worries.
Cool.
I may have to take off a little early, like around 10ish, so I can go finish up some work.
Okay. That's fine. You want to go full screen?
Yeah. Uh,
So where we left off last time, we were just dealing with how nasty the form is for like the kind of values that it parses in. So we just need
right.
to embrace that nastiness head on. Um, Open a file right now. So we're going to make an object customized for it.
All right.
Um, so this is what we changed last time, but we'll be changing this some more. So we're going to get out of the models directory, and we're going to I'm going to open a controller right now for inspiration. We're working inside the search method. We're coming through with these crazy parameters. So we're just going to wrap all that logic up into an object. Um, so I think I'm just going to do something like,
You gonna create a namespace for it, for all of it?
yeah, actually I am. Let me just make a folder for this namespace too. Queries. And this will be called uh, name of that weird join table object. Category organization. Yeah. Category. And so let's just make sure I wired this up correctly and write a test that just is able to call this object. So we can figure out right away if I have a problem with the namespace or something right now. Okay. Initialize constant queries. Alright, we need to dig into how namespaces work in this app. So usually what we have to do hold on, look
Yeah.
up something in Namely. Auto paths, that'll work perfect. So, oh, so I really don't know how our services even work. We don't have this on right now. Strikes me as very strange. Let's take a look at how our tests are calling to them right now. Okay, well, we can do this for now, where instead of using any auto-loading properties, we just manually require the file. We'll have to work out the
Oh,
details.
got you.
Because Rails basically has some properties that you can, or some functionality that you can tap into to auto-load an entire directory. But
Hmm.
let's not waste time with that right now and just manually load the file where we need it. So this is called needs to go back one more dot dot. Now it's looking in, looks like a good path, app services, queries, category organizations. So what did I do wrong here? Oh, singular. Let me make this plural. Move to category organizations. All right, there we go. So it doesn't run any specs, but as you saw, it was barfing before
Hmm.
when it was trying to call the constant. Now it's not barfing anymore, so we know we have at least that much working.
Nice.
Um,
But you still have not yet completed your namespace anyhow, so.
well, no, I did. I've got it in the right directory, right folder, and I have the namespace right here. So the way namespacing works in Ruby is you can just use modules to arbitrarily namespace things. So I have a module wrapped around a module. So this inner module right here, let's go to the console. Because when I go to the console and load the Rails console, it loads my entire app. Actually, I don't think I'll have it in scope to the auto-loading problem. Maybe I will. Yeah. So that's the namespaced one because there is
So you don't have to have classes and methods within your module.
I mean I will need to, but right now it's just making sure that the constant was in the right place.
Okay.
Um, just to get going. So usually what I do to get started is just make a generic method that is a class method. I'll turn this probably into an instance method. Do you know the difference between class methods and instance methods?
Remind me.
So, do you know what an instance of a class is?
Calling it with outside of the class?
Well, I'm not quite sure how things work in C++, but you have a class, and then you call new on that class, or initialize, or something like that, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
So,
right.
okay, so that returns what's called an instance of the class. And the instance is just one version of it, one object in memory, and you can define stuff to be on the instance, but you can also define stuff to not be on the instance, to be on the sort of constructor that made it. So the
Mm-hmm.
thing that makes it is the class, and then uh, the instance is just an instance of the class, but there's sort of like this meta class that still exists behind it. Um, and so you can define things on that meta class that are just functions that only exist on the class level and they don't exist on the instance level.
So private as opposed to public.
It's not the difference between private and public. It's okay. We'll do this like this then. We'll have a module called category organizations, and we'll have a. Okay, you know what? We'll make this a class so we can new it. A module can't be made into an instance, but this can. Uh, okay. Uh, okay, so let's play with this in the console. So, what am I doing? My namespace category organizations dot new. So, this right here is the class, and uh, oh my god. Uh, and so this right here is the instance. But maybe we should define more. Yeah, let me make this more clear. Say hello. Now notice I'm defining this two different ways. You see how I have in front of one of them self?
Mm-hmm.
Um, so right here, this is being defined on the class, whereas this is not being defined on the class. And I'll see if I can demonstrate what I mean. So this is the class, not the instance. And I can tell the class to say hello to us. say hello. But see what I'm calling this dot on? I'm calling it on the constant directly.
Right.
So when I tell it to say hello, it says hello from the class. But notice over here, I've got two methods called say hello, and I'm not hearing from this one say hello from the instant or hello from the instance. But the way we do get to that one is we make an instance of this class by calling new on it. And typically you would save this to a local variable. So we'll save it to x. Okay. So like you can see right here, the way that the console renders it, it tells you what it is, and it gives you its like reference in memory, right?
Hmm.
That hex number right there.
Yeah.
So this thing, when I call say hello on it, it says hello from the instance. Now I can actually, it has a reference to the class that made it. So if I go x.class.say hello, I can still talk via the class. But that is the class. It's always like available. It's like a global tied to that constant.
Right. I
Um,
I follow.
I mean, the difference isn't like absolutely ground shaking. I
Yeah.
mean,
No. I
it
know.
is and it is not. You'll see more when we come to having data stored in an instance. Because like when we make an instance, this was like so simplified you didn't really see what normally happens. You normally have to define an initialize method. If you don't, it just initializes to nothing. But like you have some data that you're passing into an instance, and we have some other data. And usually what people do is
You're
save
missing
this
an
to,
A.
oh, okay, I'll fix that. Some other data. So let's fix this side here. And yeah, I won't go that far yet. Okay. So let's actually just reduce it to one piece of data. I don't need to overdo it. Uh, okay. And now I'm referencing this variable that's defined on the instance.
Hmm.
So now this is where I think we'll see a difference. Um, Load. So like that. Let's get ourselves an instance. Now this time we need to make it with some data because we define it to be requiring an argument. So if I call this right now just new and not passing any arguments, it should barf, saying wrong number of arguments, 0 for 1.
Hmm.
Um, so if I pass in to some data something like um, you can actually see right there, it shows you that variable, like what it's
Yeah.
having, right? And so I can x dot say hello. I have the following data, hi, but now I'm just trying to make the point of the difference in a class method. This class method is defined on the class, not on the instance, and so there's only one, even though there can be many, many instances. And so this instance happened to be initialized with hi, the next one might be initialized with low, or whatever. And so this variable right here that I'm referencing is going to cause this function to blow up because it's not in scope. It's in the scope of the instance, not in the scope of the class.
Right.
So let's see if I'm lying. Okay, it doesn't blow up, it just has no value for that. There was really a nil there, and nil in a string just is an empty. It's nothing.
Right.
So it doesn't it doesn't have it in scope. So whatever. What we want to do, I guess we're gonna, if we want to use this, we have to put a require relative at the top of the controller. So I don't think we actually need that many dots. So we need a pair of dots to go up to the app level. So this require line is got only a pair of dots at the beginning because I'm in controllers right here. And so by going dot dot, it gets me up here at this level, and then I call services. That needs to update queries, category organizations. So now I've required that constant. So we should have it in scope. Now my goal right here is just to be able to pass everything immediately out of the controller, so the controller doesn't have to deal with any of this nonsense. So what we're going to do is queries, category organizations, call. I guess I need to give it params. Yeah. So this isn't going to do much yet, but get rid of all this stuff. So I just made a method called call, super generic, because I really don't know what I'm doing yet. I just want to get all my data in one place, and then I can start breaking it up into however I need to process it.
Right.
So I'm just going to put a debugger here so we can inspect it when it gets called. Yeah, I think that's it. So we need to start up the server. I'm going to turn it on my browser, but I'm not really going to be doing much other than making one selection and then catching that debugger. So right now it's set to all on everything, so I'm just going to pick the third option on each drop select. Hit submit. Now, okay, so everything's wired up correctly. I've got the debugger. So basically, this queries category organizations thing got passed into it a reference to params, which is all the data from the form. So all this data.
Hmm.
So we can start fresh here and just pull it all apart, get as messy as we need to get, and not complain about how we shouldn't, like how I was complaining that we shouldn't have this logic in the controller, it's too much logic, it needs to be moved somewhere else. Now we have free reign to write as much logic as we want, because
In
we've
this new directory
extracted it.
that you just created?
Huh?
In this new directory that you just created for this namespace?
Yep. So namely, we have a different name for this directory right here. We call it lib. In this
Hmm.
app, we call it services. But basically, once you're inside here, you're sort of like disconnected from everything else, and it's appropriate to write business logic as logic-y as it needs to be.
Gotcha.
Not, it's not like you want. It's okay to write complicated business logic, but you don't want to intermingle that complexity with the details of your app. The app has this sort of like flow of I take some data and I pass it to this other part of the app, and then it shows up on the page, and that's sort of like the processing, the sort of like the very generic details that are specific to a Rails app of model view and control of the way the data flows through it. If you want to build a lot of complexity, you can do that, but you don't want to like dump it right down in the middle of all the rest of that stuff.
Right. What
So
comes in that in that directory initially?
nothing. It's
Nothing.
a directory we invented.
Okay.
Um, okay.
Gotcha. Okay.
So I'm going to instantly just turn this into an instance method because it's easier to work with. The painful thing, like, I won't even go into it. I've wasted
No,
enough
go
time.
ahead. Go ahead.
Well, like, basically, class methods are pure in the sense that, um, okay, so in mathematics, I believe a pure function is something where if you pass in the same inputs, you're always going to get the same outputs. I mean, that's just almost like duh, right?
Hmm.
That's what a function is. Everything maps one to one in the entire universe of inputs and outputs. Um, so when you have a function that isn't connected to anything else, and the only thing that it has are what is passed in between these parentheses here,
Parameter.
that's assumed to be a pure function because it doesn't have any like hooks in any other data. The opposite of a pure function is like a random number generator function that, let's say, every time you call it, it returns a new number,
Hmm.
right? You call it with no arguments every single time, and every single time it gives you back a different number. So those are like polar opposites. Like
Right.
everything maps to something new versus everything maps to the same thing. So there's sort of like battling schools of thought and style, taste differences, and all that stuff of how much you should abstract out to pure functions. And I tend to believe that you want to abstract as much as possible out to pure functions because it makes your code very easy to reason about and test. But on the other hand, if you have everything in pure functions, there's not a very easy way to share reference variables, like basically this params that you see right here. Because what I'm going to have is like tons of logic for how to deal with all this stuff. And then I'm going to want to start extracting that logic out into functions, and so I'm going to turn those into uh, functions that do something with my params plus new stuff. And so really I have to start writing a bunch of functions that take a bunch of arguments, because they're all pure functions too. And it just keeps on getting longer and longer, and soon I'm passing like
More and more
arguments after
parameters.
arguments into all these functions. And so sometimes it's easier to just go ahead and do the dirty thing and introduce some shared mutable state, it's called, into the object, as long as it's sort of like not shared globally.
Right.
Um, so I'm just like going to share some state with the functions inside my um, object here. It's not really a big deal. So I'm passing right now. I know I'm passing in params. So I'm just gonna do some sort of boilerplate setup for Ruby. I'm gonna come back to that in a minute. So I'm initializing
Too
one.
bad you don't have pointers.
Well, this is a pointer.
Where?
Um, like this right here. This is
At
an object
params?
in memory. Yeah.
Hmm. So then shouldn't that allow you to call multiple parameters, being that it's a pointer, regardless?
Um, okay. So like if you, I'm just like imagining what you're talking about. You'd basically have to take that pointer and put it in a variable somewhere that's in global scope, right?
Right, right.
That's sort of like, yeah, you can do that, but you definitely don't want to do that
What?
because all sorts of things then, all your like 11 functions all have access to it, and they're all doing something to it, and then you have all your functions running all the time, and you don't necessarily, you lose track over time of when it's getting called, and then you just like, I don't know, collapse.
Well, yeah, I guess that's part of the problem with pointers, but
I mean, that's not necessarily a problem with pointers, that's just a problem with global scope. Like if whether or not like there's special syntax to deal with a pointer versus the reference to a variable or whatever. Either way, you're talking about sharing something globally.
right.
Um, anyway,
I know
so
that I know that Ruby also has that splat operator. Wouldn't that also help to sort of facilitate using multiple parameters within the scope of that um, function you have defined there?
yeah, definitely. If we if we have a need for that, we'll definitely do it. Um, so I'm just going to, as quickly as possible, get this back to a working, like what we have right now works, I think,
Hmm.
or mostly works. And so I just want to get back to that point as quickly as possible with the new implementation,
Right.
and then we can sort of like refine it. So I'm just going to do a good bit of copy paste here. Um, and I know the stuff that I'm copy pasting won't quite work, but I'm okay with that. Uh, this might be all I need to do. Organizations, I need to pull that in. Query term, I need to pull that in. Okay, I guess I need to pull all this in. Uh, or, no, I don't. So it looks like I need to pass in more than one argument to my thing here. I pass in params, but I'm also going to pass in organizations, and I'm going to pass in, I'm going to reverse the order on these. I'm going to go. So basically there's three things that are important in calculating this that I'm seeing. There's the query term, the organizations, and then the params. So we'll just go ahead and pass them all in. And we'll put them up here. Alright, I'm going to do this now and explain it later, unless you want to see it now.
No, go for it.
So, I think it's like that. I'm doing it like this. Let's go. Just make them separate. Oops, I wanted the first one. Um, Okay. So this is gonna new dot call. This needs to be set to organizations. All right. So if I did this right, which I know I didn't fully do correctly, this should be a drop-in replacement. The thing I know that's going to break are the way I'm using the params, but let's get it to blow up at that point. So I'm going to put in some debuggers at the point right before I think it's going to blow up, so we can see exactly what we need to say instead. But yeah, all right. So let's give it a shot. I mean, basically what I did is I took the logic that was happening in here, and I just passed it all through this guy right here. Does that make any sense?
Yeah, sort of, kind of.
Let's look at the diff. So you see the first block of red replaced by the first block of green. That's what used to do the work. We
Okay.
figured out what categories we had, and then we called this instance variable organizations that we already had set up, and we called search by keyword on it, and we passed in another instance variable that we already had set up for the query term, and on top of that we called filter by categories, and then we passed in categories, which we had just stitched together with 3 methods that we had defined below.
Mm-hmm.
Instead, what we're doing is we have our new special object, and we pass into it the 3 parts of that calculation, the organizations, the query term, and we're not passing in the what ID, who ID, how IDs. We're now pushing that logic into the object. We're just passing in params, and we're deleting the methods that were what IDs, who IDs, how IDs, because those figured out what they needed to be by using the params. So I got rid of those and just passed in params instead.
Okay.
Um,
Totally with you. Yeah.
okay, but I know it's going to break, so I put in some debuggers right before what I expect to be the break point, and I am going to catch them. Looks like it broke before. Wrong number of arguments, 3 for 0. Okay, so it's having a problem believing me when my object says that it wants to have 3 arguments when it's initialized. It's really strange to me. Let me try it in the console. So if I called new over here, that's not good. Got some confusion going on. Maybe I've got to problem with my indentation? Sort of do. What the heck is up with this? Hmm. It's really strange. Because before we had it barfing wrong number of arguments, 0 for 1, so it's correctly wired up, and understanding how many arguments it was being initialized with. And over here, all the change I introduced at one point, I changed something that made it somehow. Oh,
Is there a
this is
reason
it.
why?
Typo. I wrote initialize instead of initialize. Sorry, go ahead.
Well, it seems like in the new function that you wrote, you're calling params, but for all the other arguments, you're calling the object. Is there a reason why for params you're calling the actual variable and not the object? I
What do you
mean,
mean?
the pointer rather. Sorry.
Um, so everything is just a value in Ruby. We're not actually dealing with pointers at all.
Well, I heard you reference it as a pointer. That's why I'm referring it to it.
Okay, you know what? I take that back. This is the actual. It's practically like the pointer. Yeah. So sorry. What do you see as the difference in the way I'm treating
So
these?
in the I guess the method that you wrote when you refactored the previous method.
Over here.
Right. So for
Okay.
params, it seems as though you're not passing it an argument of a pointer, what you called a pointer before, as opposed to the other.
Yeah. Just because I don't have this curly on the front.
Right.
You know, it's actually not. Uh, it's more confusing than it should be because this is not pure Ruby. This is Rails mixed in. And so if this was pure Ruby, I would definitely have some instance variable like that. But since this is magical Rails, the magic coming from this controller where that I showed you had like several thousand methods, one of the magic things that they have like monkey patched at a deep level is this right here.
Params.
Yeah. So it's like a super special thing.
Ah.
So
Okay.
it doesn't follow the regular rules. But just from experience, I know that it actually is like a pointer. It's referencing an object in memory.
Understood. Okay.
A good question.
So only params you're saying is similar to a pointer, not the other arguments.
The other arguments are as well.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm passing in their actual, like, real collections. Like, if I were to somehow mutate these collections, uh, they would be mutated for the thing that passed them in. Not going to do that, but yeah, I do have that power.
Okay.
Right, so let's make a search. That will actually work. Let me just refresh this one. Okay, yeah. So right here is the beginning of the main stuff that I copied out of the controller. And it calls what IDs, which is a function, so we drop into the function here. Now, I thought that I wasn't going to be able to do this, but maybe I've carried enough of the controller magic with me. What happens when that's... Well, ain't that magic? Okay. I guess so. Okay, it's easier than I thought. So let's see what's causing it to blow up. Oh, we don't have the bug I thought we were going to have, but something's blowing up. So undefined method searched by keyword for no class. So okay, that's hurting. Let's put a debugger in right here. Basically, what it's saying is that you see how I've got like methods chained.
Yeah. Yeah.
So if the return value of the first part of the chain is nil, what I'm really doing is calling filter by category on the second on nil, which is something that's gonna barf. Like the literal explanation of this error message is that nil has a certain set of methods defined on it that's very, very small. Nil.methods, I think I can call that .count. It's got 127 methods on it, and nowhere inside that list of methods is a method called filter by category. So that's why it barfs. It says undefined method search by keyword on nil no class. So Ruby's pretty literal that way.
Hmm.
If it has a method defined, that would be completely valid. Uh, if we had all the time in the world right now, I'd even stop and show you how we could monkey patch nil to have that method so that this wouldn't raise an error. But of course, that wouldn't even be useful for our application here. But oh yeah, let's keep this debugger here. Figure out why the first bit is returning nil. So query term. We have a nil query term. I don't know if that's a problem. What is organizations? That's fine. So if we do organizations, search by keyword, and we pass a no for the keyword, doesn't look like it's having any trouble. Actually, it's not. So I don't know what that was all about. Um, so I think this is like we're done with like step one of extracting to another object. Let's test it a little more in the browser. I think we still didn't really have the functionality 100% working in the browser. Do you remember?
Yeah, I don't think it was actually. We still had an issue with all, if I remember correctly.
Okay, right.
The association of all to um, or the collection of all the organizations or the association of the organizations to.
Gotcha. Um, what's that method that we're calling? It's by categories. All right. So, did we have a failing test to wrap the trouble we were having with this?
I think you actually were able to get the test to pass, but we didn't actually solve it in the way that you found to be satisfactory.
Yeah, maybe I didn't have a test on the troublesome part. So, what would be the problem here if category ID? Let me look at, we can pull up the change log of the last one. Finds all orgs when category is nil. Let me just run these tests. We might have a failing one in here that tells us. What line number? 618. Yeah, all the tests passed. Oh, yeah, now I remember the problem. We don't have a way of showing all organizations, even ones without any category, when we have all categories displayed. That was our problem. So, before I forget, let's add so we're going to do a commit right now for extracts logic to queries category organizations. And now we're going to write a test for that failure that is causing us trouble. So that we know when we fixed it. So do we finds all orgs when category is nil. So looking at the setup here, org1 looks like it has no category, whereas org2 and org3 do. So if we call yeah, okay, so I think I did make it work, but just in like the nastiest way possible. So we'll write I think we don't actually need to write a test. We'll just keep on running these tests when we're trying to change the way we're doing it, and we'll see if we break anything. That's the whole point of writing tests, because otherwise it's just a waste of your time, but it becomes useful when you are trying to keep the behavior the same but change the implementation. Does that make sense? Are you there? Yo,
Hey, sorry about that.
no problem.
All right. Hello?
Yeah, I'm here. Uh, are you back in the teammate?
Hold on. Sorry. Okay.
Cool.
Sorry about that.
No problem. So the biggest bummer about the way the logic is currently organized is my use of the word pluck.
Hmm.
Um, there's an alternative which I I also have a pluck right here, but then here's the alternative. Select. Oops. Um, Whenever possible, I want to use select, and the reason is that select versus pluck. All right, so let's just see what pluck is. Organization pluck ID. You see how it returns array, but also see at the top of the array how it says 0.9 milliseconds. Select organizations.id from organizations where organization blah 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 blah. It actually executes a query to return this information. Um, wonder what it says with select. So with select, it doesn't actually execute the query yet. So it's basically what's sort of like often called lazy, so
Hmm.
that you can build up various parts of the query and then execute it all at once. Because right now, I basically, every time you see the word pluck, I'm executing a separate query. So I'm executing 3 queries here, and then over here, I'm executing a query, and then finally I execute the real query that I want to execute. So instead of doing 1 query, I do 5 queries. So, I mean, this is not a problem. I mean, the implementation we have now, we could ship and it could run and no one would ever notice a difference because we don't have a lot of traffic. But if we were a high traffic site, this sort of thing would be bad. And it's just sort of like, from a professional standpoint, it's sort of embarrassing to release bad code that's open source. So we need to figure out a way to get it so that we don't actually uh, do 5 queries when we could only do 1. So let's see what we can do. All right, we have, if I were to switch this out for select, um, what would that allow me to do? For this to work, I need to have a consistent return value from this method. So right now this wouldn't work because if we go into the if block, I'm returning this, what's called active record relation. like a it's this whole like non-executed query that I'm building up.
Hmm.
Whereas if I just go into the else block, I'm just returning a string. The reason I was able to get away with that is because the database is smart enough that it can work with either a string or a non-executed query. But well, yeah, maybe I can leave it this way. So for the very least, we have to now be a lot more explicit about what we're passing into here when we say filter by categories. Um, because I can't do this thing with the pluses anymore between active record relations. There's not a plus method. Like the way that the plus method works there is we had like values 1, like so a list, you can like plus lists together and it combines them. It's a way of concatenating lists.
Right.
But I don't think that works between, I might be wrong, but let's see what happens if we try to call plus. Ooh, interesting. Maybe that does work. Let's try a little more careful test there. If that's the case, it'll save us some time. Where ID, I think what it's doing though is it's executing the query. Let me see if I can. Yeah. No, it just says load. Oh, okay, we might be good. All right, so let's do a more careful test where uh, organization where ID2 dot select ID underscore dot class. Huh. We might be able to just work with this without having to do any fancy improvement.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, we'll see if it blows up, but it's actually looking pretty good. By switching this to select, I thought I had to, like, if you change what the objects are, I thought that would affect how they all talk to each other, but when you're working with Rails, where there's so many, like, conveniences built in, apparently this is sort of like an interface that is already supported. So I'm just going to put a debugger here, and we're going to run it in the browser, I think. It doesn't quite fix this one yet, but we'll take it one step at a time. All right, so what is category IDs? Oh, yeah, that's not the exciting possibility. Let's go back to there is one thing we need to check as well. What happens when I combine this with like a 2? 2. Yeah, okay, it says it's fine. So I need to choose 2 and leave 1 blank for this to be a better test. And so now if I do category IDs, you see how the objects in my list are a mix of different types? the first two are strings, and then the rest are actual funky-looking things, which are those unevaluated queries.
Mm-hmm.
I'm thinking. Uh, yeah, so that's an improvement right there. So we don't have to call pluck 3 times. But now we're stuck with one last extra pluck. Let's see what we can do about that.
Excuse me.
Call to I for category. Yeah, that's fine. Um, do you follow what I was talking about with pluck?
Sort of. I'm not sure what it was doing initially to completely comprehend.
Yeah.
I'm
So,
assuming it was. Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead.
well, when I call pluck on a record, hmm, to do this query, to do this command right here, organization.pluckid, I actually execute a query in the database so that, I mean, it's quick, but the database actually takes some time, like a tenth of a second here, but it takes some time to process this query and return a result.
Right.
Whereas if I do organization.select ID, it doesn't actually talk to the database yet. It does something at the application layer where it returns a promise to go query the database when I need to actually get information out of these objects.
Mm-hmm.
But right now, it just gives me objects that when I'm ready, I can get the information out of. But if I don't want to get information out of them yet, I can continue to pass them along my data flow.
Got you. So do you then have to call a method on that as well?
Um, it's not that I do or don't have to call a method on them at any given point. It's that I don't do any work in my database until I need to.
Okay.
I mean, once you start working with databases, you'll get more of appreciation for that. Uh, I mean, it's just something that you want to minimize. You want to minimize the number of calls to the database. You want to minimize the number of calls to some web service. Like if, I don't know if this week you were playing with HTTP requests, but let's say you were to some API.
Mm-hmm.
If you were writing a program that uses that information, you'd only want to call it when you really need to call it, right?
Right.
It's the same idea. So that was an improvement there, but we're still calling it too early over here. So what we could do, I don't know if this is a good idea. Yeah. Alright, I'm just going to see if this blows up anyway, before I start explaining something that actually doesn't work. Let's just see if it blows up when I do this. It does not. Okay. Well. Huh. Good. Okay. I guess there's no way I can get around doing. I have to do a query app. 1 point. Um, yeah. So what I'm doing here, and this is possibly bad, I don't know. I'm just, instead of checking that all the IDs, okay, so previously what we had, let me go undo, and I'll paste the current version above it. So the previous version of what we had right here basically said, give me the category IDs, turn them all into integers, because we were passing in like 10, 14, but those are really strings.
Right, I'm with you.
Okay. And then make sure that they're unique, and then sort them, and then, yeah, I mean, honestly, we might want to go back to the original one, just because it's so much more safe, because there's so many bugs that could be happening, so many ways that this could return true that we wouldn't want it to. So basically, this is being super careful. It's taking all the. I do see the problem though. Okay, so back when this wasn't those promises to be queries, like unexecuted queries, they were just a bunch of numbers. Some of them were string numbers, others were real numbers. But we basically had this step here where we mapped them all to be real numbers. We called unique on them, which removes duplicates. And then we sorted it from lowest to highest. And we compared that to the actual IDs in the database and said, okay, so if they're the same, we know that we're actually looking for all the categories, meaning actually all the organizations, even ones that don't have a category. Whereas this implementation right here is like opening up the door to a lot of bugs, because what I'm doing here is saying, okay, so I have all the category IDs, and I'm going to see how many I have. So I say dot size. And then I compare that to the number of categories I have. And if they're the same, make the assumption that I'm trying to get all organizations. The thing is, though, I'm just, like, the reason this is better is because I call unique on them, and I call sort. Like, if I somehow had a bug downstream in my code, like in my form, that like was passing in IDs that it shouldn't have, like passing in the wrong IDs, it could like inflate the number that I get in this collection here, so that the size matches what the database thinks is the number of categories, and then it's going to return all my organizations when I really didn't want that. Like if I had called unique and removed the duplicates, I would have actually seen that, oh, you know, I'm not asking for all categories. I'm asking for only these certain ones here. So this is like just more bulletproof.
Okay, fair enough.
Um, but the only problem now is that I can't exactly go map to I over it. So what we used to have is like 1 as a string, 2 as a number, 3 as a string, and then we would map over it with 2i, and we would get back everything as an integer. So 2i works on a string, and it also works on an integer. Either way, it converts it to being an integer. But I can guarantee that 2i isn't going to work on this active record relation thing that I'm introducing. So if I have a collection of those guys, right? That's basically like an array. So if I map over an array of these guys, they don't respond to the method 2i. So it's going to blow up. Let's see that. Oops. Map 2i. Basically, it starts calling 2i on each of them, and it blows up on the first one because it doesn't support that syntax. You know, undefined method to I for that organization. I don't.
I. What is the and colon to I?
Okay, so let's do the less sugary version of it. Here's me using it. But that's just like a more collapsed version of n.
So it spits out what each element in the array is mapped to.
Yep. So this one that I entered here at the bottom is the more verbose and the more default syntax. Basically, when you have a collection, you can call map on it. That's one of the nice things about Ruby. It's just available on all collections. And what map does is it takes each element of the collection and yields it into the block that's inside these curly braces. And like in this case, it's passing in one element each time, and so that's why you see that pipe and pipe. And then for each of them, I'm calling to_i, and what map does is it returns a new collection. So anyway, in this case, the only thing I'm doing is calling one method on the element that gets passed in. And so that's why the shorthand syntax of ampersand colon to_i is allowed. But if I were to need to call more than just one method, like to_i to s, so basically cast it back and forth, that works with the more verbose syntax where I explicitly have n. But if I were to try that like over here, it would barf. There's like no way to do this syntax here, like to s. It throws up.
Got you.
So that was just me taking a shortcut because I had it available. But the more maybe understandable version is just to do it like that.
Right. Okay.
Yeah. So selecting out all these IDs, blah 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 blah. Okay, actually I have an idea. So we're going to forget about this return all part, and we're just going to assign this to organizations, assign this to a local variable, and then we're going to go if why my dog's getting all excited. Size equals select category. Fuck, this isn't that great. I'm still gonna have to do one more query, but whatever. So from all my organizations, I'm gonna grab out all their category IDs and call unique on them. And if that number is the same as the number of categories that I have, I'm just going to return all my organizations. Otherwise, I'm going to return my selection of organizations. Does that sort of make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense.
So I theorize that this will work, but we have tests, so let's run the tests. Oh, that's terrible. It is barfing on my local variable name, so it must have typoed something. Yeah, I typoed it right there. Let's run that again.
Well, wouldn't it have to be, and I could be wrong about this, right? But you're asking it to count. So wouldn't it have to be count plus one equal to count plus one if it's looking for the unique ID? Because then the unique ID start from 0.
Actually, the unique ID starts from 1,
Okay.
but yeah, actually, no, yeah, perfect question. But no, the ID starts at 1
Okay.
for database records. So the thing is that they don't have category IDs. I forgot, I think, right? Let me check the database. DB schema. Hmm. So if I get out all the category organization IDs, yeah. Damn, I need to think about this. The way to know that I've gotten all of the categories, because I can't, because organizations don't have category IDs. I guess what we can do is, yeah, we can see from this query that select. I think in this case I'm going to need to straight pluck it because we're category IDs. Man, hold on. Dot select category ID. Okay, that'll work. So this is almost like me casting my types back and forth. Yeah. Okay. Let's see if this even works, and then I'll try to explain it. Give it a shot with the tests. Okay, it's not passing the tests. Let's see which ones are failing. Return all orgs. It's not passing. Find all. Okay, I'm gonna run the second test only. The third one. I'm gonna run this one. I think it's failing. All right. So we expected it to get organization 1, but it gave us organization 2 and 3. And this is a problem because finds all orgs when category is nil. So it didn't return all. Basically, I needed it to come into here I need this if statement to be true, and it's looking like it came out to be false. I can just leave this in here. Let's see why. Let's remove the duplication that I have here. Category organizations equals All right, now I can just refer to it by that name, category organizations. There. Right, I just took it out into a local variable. I'm going to bring this up too. So my assumption was that organization.select category ID does not equal category.count.
Does not equal?
Does equal. No, I can see why this isn't passing, but
Why?
let's look at the old implementation. The old implementation said that if we were passing in, let's just uncomment this and see if our tests go back to passing. Yeah, okay. So there's clearly different behavior where I thought the behavior was the same. Let's see if we can figure out why. So this returns all the organizations if, now when we call filter by categories, so like over here, this is the test that's running it. So it's calling filter by categories, and when it calls category.pluck ID, we need to see what that actually is passing in to understand what our test is testing. So at this point, calling category.pluck ID gives us, okay, it gives us 2 categories.
You need one, right?
Say what?
You need to have one.
I don't even know. I think that's right. We've only generated 2 categories. So it passes in 2 categories.
Oh, okay.
But let's comment that out and take a look at what it is dealing with at that point. So category organizations that select category ID, what does that return? Dot select category ID. I guess select won't work here because what we need to do is for it to only return. Yeah. So that whole unique thing is really important here because do you see how when we go up here and do this, it's got 1, 2, 1.
Yeah.
So what actually, if I call unique on the select, I don't even think that's valid. Oh, that is cool. Cool, okay. So I can still avoid block. Alright, so let's see if this fixes my bug. So I'll select category unique, but it's not, because basically I had 3 organizations but 2 categories, so when I didn't call unique, it came out with 3, like saying I have 3 equals to 2.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the bug. Let's see if it passes now. Is that failing? Or did it not even run? It looks like it's failing. Alright, let's just put the debugger back in here and see what it's evaluating to now. Oh, duh, I know what I did. I'll show you. It is that I'm comparing a number to an
Right, that's
array.
what I was saying. Because when you have count, it's going to be one unique number as opposed, and you're trying to equate it to an array, right? Is that
Yeah,
what you're
yeah,
saying?
so that's wrong. Right, so what I need to do is figure out what the size of that array is.
Right.
Yeah. Um, Interestingly, though, when I call size on this array here, even though it's got 2 elements, it's returning 3. And I think it's got something to do with the funkiness of using select over pluck.
Well, if it has 3, then you can do count plus 1, and then it'll still equate.
Well, no, that doesn't really. That's only just like random chance here because I have it 1, 2, 1, and so that's 3 elements, even though it's only 2 unique elements. And so
Oh.
I'm asking how many categories I have to my database, and yes, if I add 1 to that, that also equals 3, but that's just
But
coincidence.
you're calling it to unique, so unique is going to give you back 2 elements, right?
Yeah, now it is. If I do unique, and then I need to do size, which is what I was forgetting, because I was, yeah, comparing an array to the length of
Right.
an array, more or less. So let's just do block.
Yeah.
All right. So let's see if that takes care of the
Dot
bug.
count or dot size? Or
Are
is
there aliases in some cases? In this case, it's just an alias.
okay.
Um, so let's see if that takes care of the bug. Looks like it does. Let's see if all our tests pass. Boom. Okay, so
Nice.
we've refactored the code, and we're fairly certain we haven't changed the behavior, which is what we wanted. We wanted to change the implementation, but like from a black box perspective, it still works the same.
Perfect.
Yep. Um, yeah,
So you're
it's
going to push it?
yeah, I think so.
Yep.
So we still have failing tests, but they are cucumber tests. Um, well, okay, let's look at the diff and come up with a good message first. Uh, Take out a white space that I wouldn't normally have there. So we switched to using select inside the helper methods here, what ID, who ID, how IDs, and we refactored the filter by categories, not to improve the number of queries, but I think it's a little bit more readable. maybe, I don't know, it's sort of subjective, but just we get ourselves a local variable called category organizations, and then if those category organizations, category IDs, unique count are the same as the number of categories in the database, we know we're asking for all the categories, so we return all the organizations. Else, we just get those organizations with those category organization, blah, 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 whatever
No,
that.
it's definitely more readable and it's much cleaner, for
Yeah.
sure. I think so.
Cool. All right. So switches to using select wherever possible. Refactors. Filter by category. So I'm going to push this up, but I'll show you where we have some failing tests that we can work on before this is ready to be merged. So we have this I'm on my screen. Are you able to see my screen share?
Yeah.
So you see how I have some X's next to these? Like basically we have a list of commits, and then occurring next to some of them is an X. And this is like a third-party integration that we have hooked in that basically runs the entire test suite of the app for us and tells us whether or not we have failing tests.
Cucumber. You're talking about the cucumber test?
Cucumber and RSpec tests. It runs all the tests that we
Okay.
have, and it tells us if any of them are failing. Uh, and so this is a way that we we can like collaborate well. So when somebody says like, "Oh yeah, this is ready," just as a sanity check, you don't have to like pull in their code and run the test suite just to like confirm. That's something that we can automate and have it done in the cloud, and it's done on some third-party machine out there on some server, and then the result gets reported back as a green check or a red X. So it just like helps so much in terms of like merging a bunch of people's work together.
And what are you using for, for this?
Well, the service is called Travis CI. CI stands for continuous integration, and anything that brands itself as continuous integration is basically this: a service that takes your app and runs its test suite for you and reports back to you.
I think our new QA guy was actually demoing or presenting something similar on Wednesday. I mean
Yeah,
Thursday.
yeah, for sure. What he's going to be doing, right now we have this set up, but we are only having our spec tests, and so what he's going to be doing is adding Cucumber tests, and those also are going to run in this whole service.
Is he using the same CI?
No, we use Circle CI.
Okay.
It's it's probably the nicest one out there. Not that there's anything wrong with this one.
Do you guys use Teammate to pair namely?
Yeah,
Okay.
not all the time, but yeah. Um, anyway, so we see that there's a bunch of failing tests, and we need to investigate why. In some cases, it might just be something fairly straightforward. Um,
Okay.
like, there's some tests that help you out and are awesome, and then there's other tests that, you basically were testing the implementation of how it worked last time, and so then when you change the implementation, the test fails, and so those tests are just a pain. So when we go through here, we're going to like evaluate these tests like from a subjective point of view and see whether or not they're even worth maintaining. Um, because besides, I see we have some view specs that are failing, which are basically testing like the HTML. We also have, I think, some Cucumber specs failing, which basically also tests the HTML. So we might just cut our losses and only keep the Cucumber ones.
All right.
Yeah, like, see, we have a test here that's basically asserting that a certain object receives a certain message that, like, it's a very specific test that is saying like inside my controller method, I want this object to have filter by category called on it. But now that we extracted all that logic out of there, that test is failing. But that test isn't really helpful to us, so we can probably get rid of that test.
Okay.
And other tests here are going to require different tweaks, but yeah. Actually, I think we. Oh, okay. So now we do have some failing Cucumber tests. And that's because Cucumber, to run these tests, okay, so Cucumber isn't, it can be done in a bunch of ways. And the way that we're doing it here, and also the way we're doing it at Namely, is we're using a tool in addition to Cucumber called Capybara. And what Capybara does is turn on your app and run it in the background, and then take a browser, which might be a browser that like actually pops up and runs automatically for you and like steps through your test, or an invisible browser that does the same thing, that basically opens up without you seeing it and walks through the test. But it actually like goes to the page, and the way it does things is it looks for elements on the page, like the CSS and stuff like that. And so this test is failing because I actually changed the way the CSS looks on the page for the drop select. And so it's basically saying unable to find the drop select. And so that's why this test is failing.
Got you.
So it's not going to be the most exciting work, but if you're interested in Cucumber, it will definitely be a way to get an understanding of how Cucumber tests things.
No, I'm absolutely interested in doing more testing. I feel like I have not or don't have very much experience with testing at all, actually. So,
Yeah.
writing them and running them.
Yeah. Well, I'm sorry that I sort of dominated this session and just did all the typing, especially now that you've been practicing your Vim skills.
Yeah, no, it's cool. I mean, I followed along for the most part, so I'm glad that we got that sorted out.
Yep. And next time it will require, like, so this was sort of requiring me to sort of figure it out as I go, but with these tests here, I think they'll be a little more straightforward, so maybe you'll drive and I'll just give some tips as we go.
Okay, cool.
So when does the assembly classes start?
Assembly classes?
Yeah, the Ruby on Rails at assembly, or general
Oh,
assembly.
General Assembly, sorry. So it begins on the 28th, so that's at the end of the month.
Cool.
Yeah. I also think, so I guess you weren't at the meeting on Thursday,
Nope, skipped
but
it.
Matt announced that he's going to give each employee an allowance of 3K to
Yeah,
do whatever career enrichment they want.
I think that's so awesome.
It's really awesome.
Yeah.
So I'm probably gonna take like a couple of classes. Like I think I might take like a VBA. There's a VBA programming class that I think might be helpful.
Dude, that would be awesome. I mean,
Yeah,
it's totally cool that you're learning Ruby, but in terms of the actual work that you do on a daily basis, if you became really good with VBA, you would level up so much quicker just because, like, you'd be working with stuff that you're doing all the time. I don't know, when you're working with spreadsheets, if you can just, like, figure out a VBA hack to, like, make your work that much faster, you're going to start learning all these VBA hacks at once. It's going to sort of, like, snowball your education.
exactly. So I think I'm gonna try to do a VBA course like maybe first that same week, right before I begin the Ruby on Rails classes at General Assembly.
Cool.
So, and then maybe in the summer I'll take another one. I was thinking, because Manu's actually doing like this Python course through Continuum
Mm-hmm.
that I was telling you about, and
Mm-hmm.
he actually sent me, well, Rich sent me all the materials for that class, but they also offer like a Python for finance class.
Oh.
So I might consider taking that as well. But like I don't know, I kind of don't know because like I feel like having all the material, I don't know if it would be worth it to pay to take the class again.
Right, right.
Even though the material they have is for Python for science, I feel like it's probably not much different.
Hmm.
So I don't know. I'll have to think about that. But I think the VBA would definitely be beneficial.
Yeah. VBA isn't a very pretty language, but it's effective.
Yeah.
And I think, I might be wrong on this, but I think that's actually used inside of our payroll app as well.
Is it really?
Yeah, I think so.
That's funny.
So,
Yeah. So I think that's something, because like I feel like even though beyond what I'm studying, I think it would be good to start sort of integrating some of these skills into my daily accounting processes.
dude, you're gonna become like a rock star. You're gonna be done with all your work in 2 hours. You're just not gonna tell anybody that you have all these skills. You're just gonna like browse Reddit for most of the day.
And man, that would be awesome as long as I don't get caught. How about you? You gonna take any classes or anything?
Um, yeah, I mean, I expect to be using this allowance more on conferences because those
Okay.
usually come with a fairly big price tag. There's actually a class that Josh found, hosted by Facebook, that is like you can either go to Aspen, Colorado in person, or you can just like join the live broadcast for like a lesser price.
Yeah.
Uh, so that has like a price tag of $600. So I think that we could do that. Maybe like two people sitting at one computer, even. But in general, like going to a conference is sort of pricey. I wonder in that figure of 3K, does that include like airfare? Is it sort of like airfare to the conference and stuff like that?
Hello?
Hey,
Yeah, my internet's like